And we are live. The developer preview for Android P is out in the wild. Let's take a peek under the hood. Qualcomm is already teasing their next generation mobile chipset with a new modem in tow. And Lenovo Moto might be laying off more staff. We've got a lot to talk about, so make sure you're charged and ready for episode 295 of the Pocketnow Weekly. Recorded March 9th at noon Pacific, this weekly podcast is where we dissect and discuss those gadgets that make our lives mobile, smartphones, tablets, wearables. It's all the stuff you wished existed when you were a kid, and Android Pie would have been one of those weird fruit pocket things you could have bought from a gas station. I'm Juan Carlos Bagnell, contributing editor at Pocketnow.com, joined as always by plucky podcast producer Mr. Jules Wong, not on the East Coast this fine evening where he's at.
No, you're wrong, because I am on the East Coast of the United Kingdom.
Oh, burn. Look at that. Excellent. Yeah, broadcasting from the UK. You're facing some of the same issues that I was facing on recent travels too, where it didn't seem to matter what hotel I stayed at. It didn't seem to matter what upgrade package I paid for. The definition of high-speed internet when it comes to the service industry is laughably poor.
Well, when it comes to our needs, which is communicating to a broad audience here, a massive audience, is it doesn't really fit us. So that's unfortunate, but we strive on, and including with the lights here, because if you're not watching this, I suggest that you don't, because I'm using my Pixel 2 as a flashlight. Which is blinding me in the eyes, and it's very, like, it's way too much, and it's only producing mediocre results for the bang for buck.
Well, so apparently the UK is going through like a blackout right now. They don't have any lights.
This is the Travelodge in Norwich, okay? This is the train station. What do you expect?
Well, I understand, keeping your room cozy, but that's hilarious. You try like bouncing it off a wall or something.
No, I'm right up against the wall, and like this is like it's just as muddy like this, and
that's hilarious.
It's also flaring, and there's
hold on.
rings. You I can do J.J. Abrams effects with this thing.
So you go lens flare, and then I'll join you with just silhouette mode on the podcast, and now we're both equally unwatchable.
And other effects and wishes that I can put in post.
All right, I'll put that back. Yes. No, we should probably kick into some actual news stories. I think we're all recovering from recent travels and trade shows and shenanigans and stuff. Before we kick over to the news, of course, we do want to hear from you, the listener, while we are broadcasting live. There are a couple different ways that you can join the conversation, including hitting the PN Weekly hashtag through the Twitters. That's the easiest way for us to get a comment noticed on the show. While we always appreciate the live chat on YouTube, it's a little difficult to keep up with if there's a crazy conversation happening for us to decipher what you guys are talking about. And of course, traditional email. You can also get in touch with us, podcast@pocketnow.com.
Email? What is email?
Oh no, email is this hot new technology that's sweeping the globe. It's going to replace text messaging. I really think it's going to be big. I think it's going to be a big deal.
Great. In fact, we have 2 of them coming in.
Yes, we do. Yeah. So we're kind of cheating in that we've kind of gotten off schedule from our listener mailbag and listener take the wheel episodes. And so to kind of make up for that, at the end of this broadcast, we are going to take a look at 2 messages from folks that have sent them in for previous podcasts. Finally get back around to answering some of their questions. And of course, just whatever commentary you guys want to provide throughout the show. If we think it's cool enough, we'll talk about it too, live on the air.
Yeah, indeed. I've cut with the pretense on the lighting because that would be a distracting factor in the viewership here. So I apologize for the overall, darkness, but we'll move on. We'll be moving forward here. So for the week of March 5th, 2018, this is all the news that is fit to podcast. We're finally taking a good look at Android P with the first developer preview released this week. This initial stage will last through Google I/O in early May and will be flash only for Pixel phones at this point, including the Pixel C tablet. Some of the features include support for the HAIF and VP9 HDR media formats, and stricter API level targeting for apps, which meaning that they will be updated regularly. They have to be updated regularly, or they will get pushed off the Play Store. 5 previews are scheduled with a final launch date late in the third quarter. Excuse me. SoftBank's earnings report has spoiled the name of the next big chipset from Qualcomm. It's not the Snapdragon 855, but the Snapdragon 855 Fusion platform. If you've heard the word Fusion before, think Apple A10 Fusion. It will be the first to have the X50 modem that's acclimatized to 5G standards. Some jockeying still on whether it hits in early 2019 or late 2018 for at least the phones that will be having that chip, but it's coming nonetheless. Speaking of Qualcomm, the Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States has put a 30-day hold on the chip maker's shareholders vote on the board of directors. This as the agency looks into national security impacts and other consequences if Singapore-based Broadcom were to acquire the company. Broadcom, which has its own ballot of board candidates, says that Qualcomm has made a voluntary investigation request to the CFIUS and is denying the will of its investors. Apple has reportedly been working on and off on a pair of over-ear wireless headphones. It's thought that this holiday season product will share many features with Apple's own Beats products like the W1 chip for easy pairing and noise cancellation as well. Microsoft's Windows 10 chief Joe Belfiore has confirmed that Windows 10s will be converted from an iteration of the OS to a mode on the Home and Pro versions sometime next year. Currently, enterprise users can activate S mode, which runs only with optimized applications and a security tailored but restricted environment. A class action lawsuit against Google and Huawei has been allowed to go forward. The federal judge overseeing the case refused to toss out the whole case, which centers around poor warranty treatment over hardware issues causing sudden shutdowns and boot looping on the Nexus 6P. Expect the
Fruity
next
boot loops.
in this case by June. Local chatter that has spilled onto thelayoff.com claims that about a third of the estimated 500 employees at Motorola Mobility Chicago are being let go this April. Furthermore, a prominent MotoMod developer has shared his concerns but won't reveal private information on major consequences to the Moto Z line and the modular accessories that go along with it. The state of Washington has passed a law enforcing net neutrality principles on internet service providers. Those who violate it would be subject to provisions under the state's consumer protection laws. That would be the first in the nation to do so. Oregon has a law, but it only affirms what the government can do in terms of purchasing internet service. The bill goes right up against the FCC's revised rules that remove net neutrality facets. The Restoring Internet Freedom Order, as written, dictates that it would supersede any state law, so we'll have to see if any legal brouhaha comes from this. Finally, the Electronic Frontier Foundation has received a dump of documents from a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request, detailing the FBI's practice of paying off Best Buy Geek Squad employees as informants. Agents would be called down to repair facilities to look at Geek Squad customers' computers after having child porn discovered on them. The EFF claims that the FBI unduly seizes what becomes evidence for prosecuting the customer, a violation of Fourth Amendment rights. And as we go into the discussion on this story here, we want to tap into Andrew Wallace, Fat Produce on Twitter, saying, as someone who worked at Best Buy for years, I find the evidence that the Geek Squad was spying on us for the FBI sickening. I don't feel that the illegal, done without warrants price paid is worth the good this strategy might have done. Shame on you, Best Buy. So let's roll into this. What do you think of the overall assessment that these documents have uncovered?
Well, and this is one of those sort of ongoing and developing stories
Yes.
where
More
it's
documents are
yeah,
being requested.
when we start getting the actual documents, see, one of the tricky things about this is reading people editorializing about the initial discovery of this practice. So it's going to take a little while to unpack what the ramifications of this might be, but I think it definitely wraps up into a larger consumer discussion on data protection, your own redundancy, right to repair. That's actually another story too that just got a little bit of noise this week, was California introducing legislation for right to repair, your consumers' ability to crack open their own devices and fix them and have access to those materials and stuff.
Mm.
So we're going to continuously run into boundaries and conflict between keeping citizenry safe and trying to maintain some notion of privacy or absolute privacy for consumers' gadget. A phone is now the main point of entry for almost every single service and piece of data and banking information and personal information that a customer might have. So, if law enforcement is getting wind of certain trends like child pornography or sex trafficking or information relating to that, I think it is law enforcement's job to try and exercise any point of entry that they might have for unraveling or untangling how to get at the people who might be engaged in such nefarious deeds. This is constantly going to step on the toes of what we expect as consumers for our right to privacy. And I think it's going to be a generational conversation that we'll need to have in how we can rectify the discrepancy between law enforcement, third party points of services, cloud technologies. The fact that you might be able to protect the data on your phone, but if you back up to a cloud service, well, that's a hard drive that lives on someone else's server that can still be served a warrant for releasing your personal information. So I think we have a ways to go yet, even just getting the basic vernacular and education out of the way so that consumers can fully understand what their rights are and what their protections are and what their options are for this kind of information. I'm torn on what a company's responsibility is if they're served with certain types of warrants, if they're trying, should it be up to a private corporation to be the upholder of our Fourth Amendment? That I'm not entirely sure where we should try and draw those lines, or where we should lay the blame, or where we should expect protection.
Well,
And
it's the
that
fact that
is
they
a
were
different
paid, that
conversation.
there were employees within the company that were paid, that were acting on behalf of the government without the an explicit disclosure to the consumer. So,
Yeah, and that starts to sound like an industrial espionage kind of situation. But to the same token, if we're talking about international, child pornography rings.
which are it's very important that governments stem that in any way
Well,
possible.
doesn't it start to sound like, this would be a covert op from an organization like the NSA or the CIA or the FBI to infiltrate what networks they can to try and hash out where this information is being generated from and where it's being trafficked. I want to see that escalating arms race where, there's a part of me that wants to say I want to see the government do everything they can to try and stem bad actors in this space. At the same time as I want to see the arms race for better consumer protections, better encryption, a way for us to safeguard our own information at the same time. And I think the best way to get that is through sort of an open window, clear transparency policy. I don't think you can have encryption and protection in secret, because then if there's a flaw, or if there's a hole in that security, or if there's a problem with that security, or if that security's been compromised, no one will talk about it. So this is a bad look for Best Buy. It's not necessarily a great look for our law enforcement agencies, but there's also, I think there should be an understanding that the law enforcement's job is to try everything they can to get in, infiltrate, and disband people doing terrible things. So
Well,
I don't
it's
know that.
not to defend, you the trafficking of child porn, but as defending the principles of being part of the Constitution, which allows for seizure with a warrant of property, private property. Now,
Hmm.
where that line of disclosure, where that line of letting a third party come into the picture here, whether that if tacitly includes the government or any other federal or
Well,
state.
no. I completely agree, Jules. This is why I really hope we'll get. Unfortunately, I feel like the news cycle on this is going to be really short because something else is going to shock
Oh
us
yeah,
in a week, and we might not get to revisit this in the way that I really think we should. Where I feel this is a living, breathing document when we talk about the Bill of Rights and why these topics are so important to debate in a grown-up fashion over a period of time, not necessarily with the specter of a threat looming right on top of us, but actually when everything's cool and hunky-dory is exactly when we should be trying to unravel where we move forward as a society. Because let's say the practice was, this is completely hypothetical. I'm not well versed enough in this story to say that this is the situation, but to me it rings a little bit like the way that you can request or serve a warrant to Apple. You know, if someone's got information locked up on an iPhone, I feel that should be the safest vault that a consumer can rely on. I feel it's law enforcement's job to battering-ram their way into it. It should not be a technology manufacturer's job to build in a backdoor. But if you utilize iCloud, then I feel the government should be well within their rights to serve a warrant to Apple to get information off of their services. So let's say part of this service at Geek Squad was duplicating information. As soon as that information is off of the primary device, then I feel the privacy discussion shifts dramatically to what information is on Best Buy servers, what information is on a Geek Squad workstation. And then I think you have a good faith argument for the government to requisition that information. It's just, again, technology is moving way faster than law enforcement or our lawmakers can contend with. And I think it's going to take us a long time for us to sort out what the new normal will be. And once we're in that conversation, the goalposts are going to be moving on us substantially. It's going to be a very fast process with a very long
yeah.
conversation.
And there's going to be further conversation about what we do with the corporate overlords that have our data, because already
Absolutely.
those servers are just getting racked up and up and up.
Oh, totally.
So
And think about the points of failure too, because let's say your iCloud account doesn't necessarily just have Apple as a point of failure, because we got the sort of the full scoop that Apple was utilizing Google Cloud services as part of their iCloud infrastructure. So again, we're talking about an ever receding number of players at the very top of this, and if a bad actor were to find a way to compromise Amazon, that's just as dangerous, I think, to a lot of people out there as if the government or law enforcement was able to compromise Amazon. In light of all of the security threats that we've been facing at the beginning of 2018, from the local and individual level with chipset problems, security flaws in Spectre, and what was the other one? It was
well, Renata Laporte says that's the constant dilemma with digital security. We don't want criminals to go on without being discovered, while we don't want those agencies to infiltrate our devices and leaving the doors open for malwares. WannaCry, someone?
Oh,
Uh,
that's right. Want to cry inspector. So for me, I think the only thing that makes sense for a new normal is a rapidly escalating arms race between consumers, bad actors, and law enforcement. And as long as we have a very open conversation about what the next phase of security is going to look like, who's going to be involved in the implementation of that security, and what consumers can do to better safeguard their material, I think that's the only thing we should be able to rely on in the near future.
I feel like realistically, corporate or businesses are going to be the proxy for consumers in that situation. But we have to move on. Lots of other topics to get to. I want to try and de-escalate this a little bit here as we get into more of these topics that we'd like to be talking about. Just as hardware nerds. But in the meantime,
Right.
we do have this other little government bit here with the Cephius. I'm going to try and make that into a pronounceable acronym.
Okay.
Cephius intervention into Broadcom's acquisition efforts here. Broadcom has been very active and very public in terms of promoting its acquisition bids for Qualcomm. They'd be combined, they'd be the largest mobile semiconductor overlord on Earth, basically. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of reason to be interested in what's going on at the very least. And in terms of this core bit, at the moment, Broadcom is still a Singapore-based company. They're filing to redomicile in the U.S. They say they're going to be able to do that on May, but there's question as to whether the Committee on Foreign Investment would still have jurisdiction over investigating what the national security impacts on this deal would be, much less the whole package here because of the antitrust worries and other regulators
Yeah.
across the world. So this little issue here is holding off the board of directors votes that was bound to happen on March 6th. Now that's going to be on April 6th. And we'll see if investors choose to keep Qualcomm's board of directors as it is right now, or whether Broadcom's board nominees get put on and they get to hijack the destiny of, well,
Well,
I guess the
and it's
most important
interesting.
company in our industry right now.
Yeah, definitely one of the top players, and especially this seems like it's the wrong political climate for Broadcom and Qualcomm to be making this move. I mean, especially when we were covering the woes from law enforcement agencies regarding the advisory against Huawei and ZTE products. Uh, Qualcomm has kind of become a little sweetheart company in that it's American. So even though Broadcom has offices, where do they have offices? Isn't it like out here in California?
Well, before I think it was 2015, San Jose, but like it was 2015. They were a
Right.
U.S. company back before then, and then
Yeah.
they redomiciled for tax purposes.
Right. But again, that's also one of the things that's going to be sticky in this political climate is they seem to be not quite outrightly hostile or xenophobic towards telecommunications giants that aren't necessarily American, but there does seem to be a flavor of that discussion happening throughout these different sort of regulatory discussions and merger acquisition discussions. So I really think that just because there's so much money involved, and eventually at some point the top players will find a way to wedge this. I think this is going to be a speed bump. I don't think it's necessarily going to halt uh, the joining of these two mega corporations. But I think we're going to see that sort of security theater conversation, the sort of we're making a good faith effort into looking into this acquisition from our federal government, which will be a lot of sound and fury signifying nothing. If if these two companies want to join, then they're going to join.
Yeah, well, if they would, one of them doesn't want to join, and the other does want them to join. So it's more of a war between two mega corporate factors that
It's
just
all just numbers, man. Broadcom will eventually be able to put numbers out there that Qualcomm shareholders will eventually say yes to.
well,
It's
they cut
really
they cut the third offer, which is the current one, was $4 billion down from the second one, and that's after like this big deal with NXP, which revalued it at a higher valuation or whatever the heck. And so it's supposed to be more money.
Oh, I'm not
But
saying it won't be hostile, but eventually, I mean, this, it's kind of like mafia politics, right? Eventually, there's going to be a number on the table, higher or lower, that Qualcomm shareholders are not going to want to say no to, lest they wake up with metaphorical horse heads in their beds.
well, I can appreciate that argument. We'll move on from that and into Android P. How about that? Finally, something that we can get the nerds excited about, I guess, right?
Well, excuse me, man, I can't shake this cough. Yeah, definitely some interesting things unpacking with Android P, especially in sort of the light that we're in, sort of the time that we're in with competition. iOS taking Apple taking a back seat for new features on iOS to clean things up. Android, I think, finally finding its feet. I'm not necessarily too upset with manufacturers that might be skipping over Android 8.0 to skip to 8.1. And I think right now we're going to be in a good culture of refinement and optimization. Definitely some new features that we're going to be excited to be playing with in Android P. But it seems to be an ongoing conversation with Google to rein in manufacturers just a little bit more, a little bit of lobster pot here, a little bit of refinement there.
One of
And
the factors that one of the aspects that they haven't been able to rein in and they've adopted to is the cutout, the notch, and whatever. Like at least there's one place where hardware is going to be the key factor in terms of Android catching up.
I feel the discussion on that is maybe a little short-sighted. That supporting alternative screen shapes and form factors doesn't necessarily stop at the notch. So let's say you want foldable, bendable displays. Let's say you want dual flip out displays. Let's say you want a smartphone that's a compact,
Or for that
a
matter,
completely
like
circular
dot
display.
matrix scanners on your face for whatever purpose, not just for security, but for just face track. I get that, but it's going to be something that software always reacts to because, or at least like a wide base platform like Android instead of Samsung with its own experience UI or whatever. Like they can tailor their own thing and they can be the first on proprietary hardware, as a matter of
Yeah,
speaking.
but the first who does it proprietary, typically it typically that's terrible. Um,
Oh yeah,
you
of
know,
course, but you have to
so we
at
can take it
some
back to
point.
the Kyocera Echo and say, like, you know what, not having actual good operating system level support for this dual screen implementation really hurt that product. And I feel there are some significant teething pains when we move up to a product like the Axon M. In This is a great hardware idea, very well implemented, very well executed, that feels really clumsy when you're switching between some of these different modes. So I don't want to get too hung up on just the idea of a flip out display, but again, making Android more hardware aware, I think could be a good step towards future implementation of more radical departures from the rectangular glowing slab that we're at. I think the media in general just gets overly hung up on this unibrow discussion because of the iPhone 10,
Well, I
especially
mean,
with was it Bloomberg that set the tone of the discussion, where
oh
the
yeah,
only thing they
definitely.
talked about on Android P was the notch. Oh,
There
Android
was
P
there
is
was a
all
good
about.
column on that. That's but like really, I mean, it's
No, they dedicated 2 minutes of TV news broadcast to only say that the major update coming to Android was that they were going to copy the notch on the iPhone 10. So when
that
that
was a segment
leads,
that propped up the column that was going to. It was like
right?
it feeds back on itself. There's a snowball effect. I get it. I totally get it. But when people look at this and see and say why, they start to dig into the factors that are going in. My favorite word is factors today, and
Mhm.
they're getting to the point where, all right, this hardware necessitates this. People are demanding bigger displays, better than ever, and whatnot. And sure, that may be a part of it, and that might be what it takes to fit in the selfie camera, the earpiece, or whatever. Uh,
Well, I just mean even down to simple things. Like, look at the LG G6, and we had teething pains just supporting rounded cutoffs for the display. Just making Android aware of that was a tricky endeavor in the very initial launch of that product. So taking that kind of pressure off of manufacturers, where if they want to do something, you want a perfectly oval screen for no good reason, you want a roll upable display that then changes depending on what parts of the display are actually visible to the consumer. Those types of things I think play a big deal. Of course, the disappointing thing is going to be that the first implementations of this probably will relate directly to notch phones, which I think the notch is terrible. I think it's absolutely horrific design for the implementation of an all screen front face, and I think it needs to tragically die in a dumpster fire. But what I do see is the potential for this is getting Android out of hard coding a specific kind of aspect ratio and resolution and giving those tools to manufacturers and developers so they can more easily implement modular, foldable, and design shifting implementation that Android can play with much easier than it currently
well, I
can.
think that already happens at the Android developers level at the with the studio and whatnot, and it's up to them to
I mean,
see how
it
many.
does. It does, but we can always make those tools better. And again,
It
I point
always,
to the Axon M in that I don't feel the user should have to push buttons on the bottom of their navigation bar to tell the phone, oh, by the way, I want you to mirror this. I want you to go full screen with this, or I want you to, go split screen. That feels like an Android ice cream sandwich style solution to user interface and navigation. It doesn't feel like Google can proactively work with your behavior to feed you the kind of content that you want kind of solution. And it's because ZTE is doing something that Google isn't looking to do with Android. They're cramming an extra feature on there that isn't really native to the way that Android interacts with hardware.
So as to avoid this topic, you didn't. People have been hyper focusing on the notch, but to avoid that becoming this segment here, I want to talk about the media side of things. Multi-camera API that finally letting third-party applications do their things with however many cameras these manufacturers want to stuff onto their phones. As well as the HAIF. I'm not sure, or HAIF, whatever the heck.
I like
HEIF.
HAIF.
You like
Yeah,
HAIF?
HEIF. Yeah.
The successor, the imminent successor to JPEG, and also VP9 HDR. Wondering what your take is on that, especially after Apple has been adopting HAIF and VP. Did they adopt VP9?
I don't know that Apple is properly supporting VP9 other than what might be built into application level support. No, and anytime we start talking about moving forward on media codecs and compression, I'm going to be a big fan of that. It'll help having Google involved with image compression because even with the iPhone moving over into this style of image compression, it's taken a while to get good consumer support across multiple services and editing and different solutions that people might want to use for uploading and sharing or editing, uploading and sharing images. I I kind of wished that Google had maybe made a little bit more noise about HEVC, but again, because Apple's doing it, Google is now tacitly supporting in YouTube and on Google Photos. So they don't necessarily need to make a lot of noise about that. They can keep trumping up VP9 HDR, but I won't really consider VP9 a solid solution until a Pixel comes out that natively shoots with a better video compression than what they're currently utilizing. Where I can shoot HEVC on a Huawei and I get great image quality at significantly smaller file sizes. I can shoot phenomenal 4K video on an iPhone with great image compression, great file sizes. I want to see that on a Pixel. If it's VP9, great, do it. I'm excited. I want better video at a smaller file size. That's ultimately all I care about. But if they're not going to natively build that into, and we're going to keep playing this game of, well, the phone shoots H.264 and then it gets uploaded to a server where it's then re-rendered into some kind of streaming acceptable format, that's not a solution. That's not a way to go.
Mm. Well, I mean, maybe Google has its reasons for not being too excited about HEVC.
Well,
Yeah,
it's licensing. Yeah. I
keep going
mean,
to licensing, but whatever. I mean, there
but
has to be a better solution to this, and Google has the infrastructure and resources to
and at
do
the end of
that.
the day,
Should
it's
be
just
willing
like
to do
there is
that.
a solution and people are
There's a,
using it, and Google's not in that discussion directly at all. So that makes them far less relevant when we're looking at improving the situation for people to have better video at smaller
yeah.
file sizes.
Peter Hayton on the tweeters. Great points on Gadget Guy. I would be the first to say new screen designs, aside from the glowing rectangle idea, we could get back to something people are really interested in. Look at Nokia with the banana phone, Nokia 8110. We know this creates interest, which I'm looking at this right here. It's with the notch. Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
right. It was with the notch for the Motorola Batwing logo.
From a Renata Laporte. That's
From a
hilarious.
lot of port, whatever this phone is. I'll use that segue in just a second, but also Peter Hayton says, plus Michael Fisher, Mr. Mobile, never did get his runcible, which was the circle round thing that was like a phone but not really,
Right.
and it was made out of plastic from the Great Barren Island of plastic trash, or whatever the heck it
It
was
looked
called.
like kind of like an offshoot of, if you ever saw the movie It Follows. They have this weird like PDA phone thing that looks like a makeup compact with a circular screen, and it's supposed to be anachronistically futuristic for this sort of low income area in Detroit.
Well, for
Like
the
things like
record,
that are
yeah.
kind of hilarious.
Oh yeah, totally. For the record, he did actually get around to getting his device and reviewing it as well. I would be very remiss not to note that. So go look it up. Uh, Runcible. Yeah, that's right. That's
Well,
how it's
and
spelled.
also we do have just from Peter Hayton too, that Apple apparently did drop support for VP9 in favor of
There we go.
H.265. Again, I mean, we've been working with H.265 in the consumer space since the Samsung NX1. I mean, this is a really well understood codec, and people, companies not supporting it now are basically just impeding progress because it's great and it works great and it does exactly what we want it to do in trying to free up bandwidth issues and storage limitations. The fact that we're not on it is hilarious and in the worst way possible.
It could, I mean, make it a standard essential patent, and then we'll be talking about something. But
Yeah.
yeah, maybe that has to happen. We'll move on from that. Speaking of Motorola, just a few seconds ago, a little sad news about the layoffs that might be happening, as well as the ruminations of what's comprising of those layoffs here. So, for perspective, I believe just maybe a decade or 15 years ago, we were talking about 40,000 in Motorola's ranks.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, if the cuts are coming as they say they are at the third, 1/3 proportion that we're talking about here, we could be looking at 350 at best.
Wow.
Yeah. And this is coming from Lenovo took over in 2014, I believe. And if I look back into things, at least the company was still in five figures, 10,000 at least. So from
Dang.
that,
That
all
is
the way
a
down.
rough blow, and especially difficult for the industry where I think there are a lot of us that are feeling a bit nostalgic for some of the more exciting days of smartphone manufacturing. And same thing, like a company like HTC facing a number of woes, and their earnings report coming out and being not particularly motivating that the company might be writing its course after Google buying out a significant part of their smartphone team. It's upsetting. I I kind of just hope that what this means is we'll see a more focused Lenovo Moto. Both
Well,
Peter
what's
and
there to
Andrew.
focus on at this
Well, no,
point?
that's exactly it. Peter and Andrew in our we're having a Twitter conversation about just like the insane number of Motorola badged devices that are apt to come out. Where the Moto G series used to be a very simple argument for an entry level to mid ranger phone, now spans, I think, what, 7 different products for the
And
G5,
it's
between the
mostly on.
G5, G5S, the G5S Plus, the G5S Special Edition. Like getting these disparate teams between Motorola engineers and Lenovo engineers all working on the same page might have been a bridge too far. And
Well,
unfortunately,
yeah,
Lenovo
a
owning
lot
the
of that
Moto brand.
transferred over to China, anyways.
Well, but that's just it, is Lenovo owning the Motorola brand, who's going to get let go of? The people in-house under Lenovo's umbrellas or the people in-house under Motorola's umbrellas? And if that means that we can get a more focused approach to how they're developing products, this is a problem we've detailed with other manufacturers too, like LG making certain phones for some regions with some features that other regions don't get. That's a bad way to position your products. Having a million different Moto E variants doesn't help move the needle on getting consumers acquainted with your products and teaching them
This
what
is
they
what
should buy.
Lenovo has said. They want to strike a chord in the premium market in the toughest nut to crack, the US. And they have not been successful at the low levels of the employments that they have in terms of the U.S., where their native market is. So, and they're trying to do that. They're trying to replicate that elsewhere in the world. I get that, and they might think that China might be the best place to do that. But so like even in Lenovo's own brand, where the premium has just been poor, their own brand phones have done very poorly. It's the sense isn't there. They can have their people work on a Motorola brand, and it'll make all the sense of the world. But they have never struck anything premium that has been a big success, or at least a big enough success, reportedly, to offset losses in China. But that's the read I'm getting on this news here. So,
well, yeah, but I also don't think that you can have split focus between Motorola branding and Lenovo leadership and arrive at something where they're going to be a bit more focused. We do have a couple tweets on this from Fat Produce. I wonder if the Moto layoffs are a result of the Moto mods failing as a strategy, a la the LG G5. That's an interesting hypothesis, but I don't feel that the accessories division is necessarily, going to be the sticking point here. I think just phone sales and getting excitement and getting people up front probably a bigger problem. Lenovo needs to focus on marketing. This comes from Claypot at Chatty Boy. And actually, I got to say, I think Motorola does a good job of advertising the United States. I
yeah,
see
their
numerous
ads are on
commercials
pretty
for,
heavy rotation on
yeah,
all the TV channels.
it's more, again, when you're banking on something like modular, you have a different kind of conversation with consumers and educating them as to what your platform has to offer, and that's an uphill battle. And again, we would only be into the second generation of Moto Z phones that support that feature, and I don't think that feature really becomes consumer viable until we're through generation 3. And then I think consumers start to take that more seriously. But at the same time, smartphone manufacturing seems to be settling into a good enough place where I think a majority of Samsung and Apple customers don't necessarily feel that their phones are lacking anything specific. I could put a better speaker on there, but okay, that means I need to put my phone down and then it's a speaker, and then I can't use my phone because my phone is a speaker. Like that's a hard conversation to have, to try and inspire consumers as to why they should switch teams to a modular
But
device.
what else would they have other than being like Samsung, other than being like LG, other than
No,
being like Nokia? I'm seeing Renato Laporte here again talking about
talk
what
about
they should
nostalgia.
do, or what they should do, because everyone has their own prescription for an ailing company that's dying. The first thing Lenovo should do is get their software update strategy together. So go Android One. Nokia. Second, focus on 3 lines with each max 2 phones a year, which has been the case for Motorola a lot for the past several years. Also, like we've been talking about this for Microsoft back when it still had a stake in mobile, and that didn't really work out. But there are more blocks that crumbled on them, I suppose, and fix the failures that have been plaguing Moto since forever. For example, the camera quality. All right, so even if you do include good cameras onto flagships or whatever devices, uh, that really puts you up against Samsung, and
Well, and the Pixel and the
you're
iPhone.
in. Well, yeah,
So,
and the Pixel and iPhone, and you're
so
still
I,
competing for
I,
that price bracket for that value, which
I
they
should
have struggled to
reiterate.
do.
I should specify that wasn't a Jules rant. That was coming in from tweets from Renato Laporte.
Well, that was partially me too, because I was
Well,
going
no.
over each point.
So here's the deal. And anyone who says they have a cure, I mean, we're all enthusiasts, so we all have ideas as to what we
Oh yeah.
think might help a brand or what might improve the situation. Uh, I think messaging is a very important factor for a number of companies, but only when you have something to message, only when you have something to talk about. And the smartphone market is so heavily commoditized right now that I don't think any company should expect a 3 to 5 year mission where they can really crack into the market share, especially in the United States. Crack into the market share that is currently dominated by Apple and Samsung. Like 85 to 90% of all phones sold in the United States have a Samsung logo or an Apple logo on them. If you're going to disrupt that market, the opportunities you need to take, especially at the premium end, differentiators matter. It's one of the things that like bugs the crap out of me about LG commercials is not a single one focuses on the fact that they do have an objective best on the V30. Objectively, without question, not open to interpretation, not how you feel about your phone. If you want the best headphone jack and the best support for high quality audio on a device, it's the LG V30. So where is that commercial where they can simply directly communicate to consumers saying, this is something we offer that none of our competition can match? So for Motorola, I don't necessarily know what that is, because I think the conversation on modular is a bit too broad. Telling the consumer you can make your phone whatever you want it to be when they're looking at the most popular phone saying, well, Motorola, can you make my phone a Galaxy S9? Because according to the media, that's what I want. You know, especially opposite Samsung is a juggernaut of advertising.
It's also part
That's
the
really
view
tough.
that they're crippling the body, the chassis of the phone for the sake of promoting the freaking accessories, which,
This is definitely a Lenovo idea, because I don't necessarily look at it as crippling the device. It's because I mean, you look at some of the like, especially Lenovo in the early days of modular and multi-mode Windows 8 devices. There was a definite aesthetic push towards making ultra slim, ultra light, ultra portable. And so the converse, the compromise to that is not being able to include the largest battery. So they focused on fast charging technologies. They focused on modular accessories. They focused on different power bricks. They focused on a number of things that could make that solution, because to them, you could make a super thin laptop that then someone else could carry extra weight if they wanted more battery power, but you can't build tons of battery into a product and then satisfy someone who's looking for a MacBook Air style solution. This move for the Moto Z line to me feels very much like a Lenovo aesthetic. The Moto Z, especially the skinnier ones, the Moto Z and the Moto Z2, we're looking at an ultra thin battery that's not going to satisfy a lot of the enthusiasts and the people who are going to echo chamber about specs in Android phones. But this is balanced by having a proprietary infrastructure of accessories and support that can build onto the functionality of that device. So I get it, but I still say that is one of the hardest conversations you can have with a consumer, telling them not only should you buy this phone, but then you can do all these other things with this phone. And most of these things are not going to apply to you, but that's what you're going to pay extra for to support the engineering, the development, the QA on a modular device. If you can't crack that conversation for your general consumer in a way that they can understand when they walk into a carrier store, see a display and go, oh, that's something that I think will benefit me, then all you've done is you've confused the consumer. You've made them realize that the Galaxy is the safer choice because it just has everything in it. You don't have to worry about buying extra pieces to slap on the back. And you've kind of reinforced your competition. And that's where I think Motorola has made some messaging missteps. They've definitely, I think, done a good job of keeping up the advertising. I just don't think they found the killer app for it. And it feels like a work in progress that won't be finished by the time that they've abandoned support for it.
So we're going to switch segments and talk about your listener mail in just about 3 minutes. But I want to make this final point before we do. So if modular, just to be crude about it, is a problem that needs to be fixed by getting rid of it, that's the solution. All right. So what can Motorola do in the premium space where it is a prerequisite to have a superlative on there? And it's not just enough to be, camera, because, oh, Samsung has this freaking adjustable aperture thing going on, and oh, there's this trick and that trick, software too, AI. Lots of bombardment going on already. Where's the superlative, and where's Lenovo's justification in even fighting in $700, $800 ranges at this point? That's my question to you, all of you.
Well, I mean, just to take a stab on it, the problem is that you need to make a superlative somewhere. I mean, notice that I didn't claim that the superlative for the V30 was the camera. It's the best camera for me, but I completely understand why that's a much broader differing opinion kind of situation.
But them DAX, bro.
But DAX, bro, I mean, I got math on that. There's science backing me up
There's the
there.
math, like four. Oh man.
Yeah, right. No, so the problem is that a company has to go out of their way to create a niche where they can deliver a superlative. I would be willing to posit that the best communications device of the last year was the BlackBerry Key 1. And then consumers are going to have a conversation as to how much do they value certain methods of communication to warrant the cost of a device that has a hardware keyboard. That becomes at least a data point or a discussion point that you can engage with your consumers. Saying you can make your phone anything is too broad. I would love to see some kind of return to a more, it's sort of a Motorola of old, where Moto Maker maybe introduced a conversation of, all phones have these great specs. All phones have these solid cameras, audio, screens are looking really cool. We're the only manufacturer. Don't look at Essential. We're the only manufacturer that can offer you this type of premium build experience for a device. Not only business grade in the way that you remember Motorola's of old being the preferred choice for the businessman on the go, but then also to match the style that's needed when you walk into the boardroom. And that could be a superlative conversation. Do you want the back of your phone clad in customized, embossed Horween leather? Do you want the sides of your phone to be made out of titanium or carbon fiber or another material that's truly exotic and not just another BS piece of glass, shiny jewel tone device coming out of every manufacturer this year? I feel that could be a conversation that Motorola could easily revisit, capture the nostalgia of the Motorola brand, the Batwing brand, and then also set themselves apart from these techie geeky discussions. Because again, it's not us enthusiasts. You've got to get general consumers on board. And I think you can win points with general consumers by saying specs don't matter. They seriously don't. I mean, you can get a $400 phone with a top of the line processor and a great screen and a good camera. That's not important. But can you get a top of the line phone that's customized and built with this exacting, like, fine automobile aesthetic? That is an interesting conversation that a manufacturer could have. And again, it would definitely be branding and advertising. It wouldn't necessarily be true, but enthusiasts crying about it won't matter a skosh. It won't matter at all to the consumer who walks into a carrier store and sees a display of, we will custom build. This is a bespoke gadget that will fit you and fit your style and fit your lifestyle. You don't have to worry about throwing a case on this because we've got the shatter shield and we've got this, and this is the best accessorized platform, and
you can't
we've got
count the shatter
brands.
shield as a superlative.
No, but that's just that's just it. That's what I'm talking about, is in terms of the advertising on this, and is for the optics on this. Shatter shield is really cool. I'm just mad that Motorola doesn't make their own first-party glass screen protector to go on top of Shatter Shield. That, I think, solves all of our problems right there.
Just include it as part of Shatter Shield, but that's just me. I will go to your point about 5 years ago, I was pretty unwrapped in the Moto X and what it really brought in terms of the potential of my creativity, in terms of making a statement about my phone. I really miss that. I want that back. Definitely a great thing to bring back. I think it was a little ahead of its time, actually. So
totally
5 years later, who knows? That could be one chip in the armor that is everyone else out there.
Because right now, if it's just glass with a Qualcomm 845 and a good camera, you've basically given up. I mean, like, specs for an HTC U12 sound great, but why would I get one over every other competing device that's going to enter the market with kind of the same bucket O stuff. And if that's the only thing that's entering into the conversation, again, smartphone is a commodity. Consumers need to have them. They aren't exciting in the same way that they were 5 or 10 years ago. And if you're going to try and command a premium, I think Essential had it right. I think they were talking to the wrong demographics of people. They were trying to impress the wrong demographics of people. And I think they were focused a little too much on some of the enthusiast discussion when they could have entered in and said, what other phone is made out of a ceramic back with a titanium frame? It's the same thing. LG missed an opportunity to say, what other phone other than the V10 is durable and built with stainless steel rails on the sides of the device? Those words sound awesome. A commercial featuring that language targeted to general consumers sounds awesome. And I think it's a missed opportunity when the design team goes out of their way to do something interesting and then the company advertising department never talks about it.
What's interesting is, oh, hey, it looks like the iPhone 10 right now, and oh, there's this AI software. So I think breaking away from that, the first out of the pack to do that is going to have their cake and eat it too. You can see full details on these stories and more. Hit pocketnow.com and on social media too. Also, look for the podcast section on the site to get to this episode's rundown. You can chat with us about what you've been reading up on with the hashtag PN Weekly on Twitter. And be sure to check out Jaime Rivera and the Pocket Now Daily on our YouTube channel. You mentioned HTC. We will get to them, but first we will take a short break.
Just a quick break for a word from our sponsor. Looking to move to the cloud? Don't know where to begin? Check out the Google Cloud Platform Weekly podcast, where Google developer advocates Melanie Warwick and Mark Mandel answer questions, get in the weeds, and talk to GCP teams, customers, and partners about best practices, from security to machine learning and more. Hear from technologists all across Google about trends and cool things happening with our technology. Click to learn more and subscribe to the podcast at g.co/GCP podcast.
Hooray.
We'll kind of made it through that.
We'll edit it in post.
We'll fix it in post. Yeah.
Okay. Calm down. Now we have to get back into things. Hold on. And we are back. And I think it's time to open something that has been latched for a little while. It's been very much dusty and old, and I don't know where I'm going with this intro, actually.
I am totally lost. Again, dude, I try to yes and you whenever I can, but I'm not sure how to back you up on this one.
Well, it's the mailbag, and we have 2 letters here. We'll start off with Zain Sherbaji here talking about the Elite X3. You remember that phone from what was it, 2016 or last year? I don't seem to remember it.
It's old. Yes.
A Snapdragon 820 phone with Windows 10 mobile. One of the few that did it. Also, Bang & Olufsen sound. Just all the things that you would want in a phone, but with Windows 10 mobile on it. Zane writes, "Good insert time of day, my dudes. I work in a hotel and have seen rare electric slabs from across the globe. But tonight," I tried to put a little emphasis and coughed there. "But tonight, I have seen a beast so exotic, it astonished me. The HP Elite X3, being wielded by the most hipster businessman. And the one comment he said was, 'It has its problems.' Thank you for listening in, and keep on sailing into the virtual sunset. Ziggity zoogity, Zane."
Aw, thanks, Zane. I do love seeing
those. X3.
No, but I love hearing from people that have those like sort of like wild phone out in sightings. Like, hey, I saw this out in the wild.
Pertaining to this phone exactly, because this was like the savior. This was supposed to be the third-party savior of Windows 10 Mobile or something like that a couple of years ago, with its high-end specs and all the features for enterprise and for even the enthusiast that has been dying because of what Nokia couldn't do, which was produce a decent flagship or what Microsoft couldn't do, excuse me,
Yeah,
because it's
Microsoft
Microsoft.
couldn't do them. Nokia was doing great.
Nokia was doing great, and then Microsoft had to come into it. But yeah, um, and this is the phone that's still being sold today. It's going to be sold through 2019 as the lasting vestige of what's effectively a dead platform.
Mm-hmm.
And the one comment that the person who owns the damn thing says is, it has its problems. So apparently, this phone got out to customers that just had to get a phone, and it's not being properly appreciated, or it's just not, or it could not even be
Well, it's a
doing
sad
its task.
state because companies like HP and Microsoft kept playing this game where they dip their toe into mobile and then run away screaming and then come back a couple years later and try it all over again. And this goes all the way back for HP. This goes all the way back to their acquisition of Compaq. I was a huge fan of Windows Mobile PDAs, and then we got iPacs, and then they absorbed the Jornada line, and we started getting these like Palm Treo competitors. You could get like a Windows Mobile PDA phone with like a clip-on keyboard or like a dial pad on the bottom, and there would always be this sort of half-hearted attempt at making it something that businesses would want to use as a fleet device. And then they would just disappear for years. Like terrible support, no updates, no infrastructure, and then they would come back and try it and do it again. And I still maintain. I was in a Discord conversation with Andrew Wallace and Renato Laporte talking about just we occasionally still see, like people who opine about live tiles and Nokia Lumias and stuff like that. And we got to a point where there were many regions in Europe that were starting to crack over 10% Windows Phone market share. The United States, I think we peaked at 4, but I was seeing Lumia 1520s out in the wild. Like I was seeing them here in Southern California. That was an audacious device that I think helped start part of the conversation, along with the note, in getting rid of mini tablets is like this really consumer desirable product segment. And if we had only seen more regular support and more regular updates from Microsoft, that I think we would have seen progress on this front. Instead, we got this Microsoft treated Windows Phone like a desktop operating system. Like, here's Windows Phone 7. We'll see you in 3 years when we update it, but no new devices will get it. And then you'll see Windows 8. And we'll see you in a couple years when Windows 10 comes out. And that's a terrible way to try and have a relationship or a conversation with a consumer, let alone like saying that you're supporting developers to try and make apps for platforms, which then just hard end support. So your Windows Phone 7 investment in making an app is completely destroyed when Windows Phone 8 comes out.
I imagine this one fleet manager, like he's been able to convince all the higher ups, this is a good investment, the Elite X3, get it for all of us. And it's like, hey, here's the Elite X3, use it now. And everyone's like, well, this is not intuitive and it's not really good, but it was like, no, you have to use it, you must use it properly.
Right.
You're using it wrong. And
well, and it kind of goes to a company like HP put their necks out there to build something. Again, they're not completely faultless in this because they keep dancing in and out of their mobile strategy too. But they put it out there, and it just reinforces not only to manufacturers but also to consumers why you should never stray from the iOS or Android ecosystems. And that's a major bummer. And I think I'm not going to be surprised. I'm going to laugh, and I'm going to be very hesitant to jump on board. But I do feel that there's going to be this long-term end run from Microsoft where, again, they're not going to call it a phone operating system. It's going to be some flavor of a future version of Windows that's modular, kind of like this Windows 10S mode. But we can make a mode which is just for a small screen device, which could also incorporate an always-on connection thanks to our new support for Windows 10 on ARM chipsets. And it's just going to change the form factor of Windows so that it's more like gesture-based and easier for smaller screens. And it's got an LTE radio, so you could make phone calls on it. It's going to be a new breed of Windows 10 mobility products. I totally believe that will happen, that Microsoft will say they're all in support of it, all committed to it. It'll last for about a year, and then they won't update it properly, and we'll be right back where we were again with Windows Phone again. And that's a shame, because I think we could be doing a lot better. And I think if we had more competition, I think if we had a plucky third place smartphone operating system to draw support from developers and to just kind of keep the discussion going on innovation, then I don't feel Android and iOS would be approaching the same meeting point of shared UI, shared application state, shared feature functionality. Every time Apple announces something that they're moving forward on, Google has an immediate counter to it: AR Kit versus AR Core, depth of field blur on cameras versus new camera APIs. This is kind of what's leading to some of the feeling that the smartphone has stagnated.
At least in the rhetoric war, which I totally understand, but I feel like there are a lot of gaps and valleys and nooks and crannies that would be filled if we looked a little bit deeper into that. But we're not going to, because
that could be its own whole show. Yeah,
but we do have 35,000 feet around here. Come on.
We do have a couple tweets here. This is from Andrew Wallace. The last time I went to a Microsoft store, I saw this phone. He's talking about the HP Elite X3. I saw this phone on display, and there wasn't even a security device keeping it from being stolen. And then from Renato Laporte, to this businessman's defense, Windows Phone had the best mail client I've ever seen on mobile. So a businessman without the need of a Snapchat or an Instagram could be really happy with it. But you're also mostly missing out on things like banking apps, and those are very important. And I have to agree, it's when we started seeing that support pulled, that was definitely a major nail in the coffin for Windows Phone.
Yeah, if there wasn't growth, at least some growth, then, well, I would be outraged at the app, decline. But there wasn't growth. There wasn't hardware growth, so there couldn't be software growth. You know what? One company used to make a few Windows phones on occasion.
That's a very good question. What company used to make Android phones?
They used to make Android phones?
Well, they used to make them back in the day. I think you might be segueing into a discussion on HTC, is what I think you might be trying to do.
Well, we made a good attempt. But this little mail that's coming in from Goran Petrovic says, one dilemma. Are HTC's manufacturing expenses too high so they can't lower pricing? Or are they just too proud? Lowering price for their phones would instantly help them in short terms. They removed the headphone jack. They replaced the one name. They didn't even include OLED on their phones. What's next? Another jewelry phone? Sent from my HTC 10. I like to point that out, since that was the last of the one series. It had the metal going on. It had that unique design language, and it wasn't a jewelry phone, as Goran says. But
Right.
HTC has always had some pride in terms of being able to manufacture high quality design and even creating those designs. So that's always been built in, just like Apple, as to some part of the price tag. But in terms of other innovations, they're give and take, and I'm not exactly sure where the manufacturing expenses would be on that, but certainly.
Well, I think a couple things are at play here. One, we know HTC doesn't have the leverage to command the most preferred pricing on all components. An Apple or a Samsung can walk into any office and say, "Hey, we're gonna be using your product to build Galaxy S9s,
and we can guarantee this scale."
Yeah, and so we need 50 million of what you're going to manufacture for our phone, and you're going to give us the absolute razor thinnest margin that you possibly can to support that manufacturing endeavor. HTC cannot come anywhere near that. So even when it comes to things like RAM, chipsets, the raw materials that go into the PCB or the logic boards of these phones, they're probably paying more per unit than Samsung is for what would be a comparable product. At the same time, if if an HTC flagship suddenly got price cuts at launch, not only do I really do believe that HTC is already in a dangerous position with pricing. I feel they probably are trying to work with the smallest amount of padding that they can. They're also going to start losing the conversation of premium products. I hate to say it this way, but I think that the reason why the Pixel is becoming a better competitor for the iPhone from the Pixel to the Pixel 2 isn't because Google did anything special with the manufacturing of the phone. I think the biggest change was that they priced it to be more cost competitive. They priced it up to be more cost competitive against the iPhone. So now it looks like a proper competitor to the iPhone. It looks like the Google iPhone. And that price tag plays a lot into the psychology of a consumer who might be comparison shopping. If you saw a Google phone that was priced $200 to $300 less than an iPhone, well, then obviously the Google phone is $200 to $300 less good than an iPhone, and I want the best phone, so I'll buy the iPhone. Winning that psychological battle is huge. So from the enthusiast point, you're absolutely correct. When it comes to HTC technology, they have a hard time competing against an outlet like OnePlus, where OnePlus is able to draw on some of the manufacturing acumen of Oppo, a much larger manufacturing partner. And so they can be more cost aggressive. I'm sure we'll see something similar when Honor starts selling phones in the United States again. The Honor View 10 might be getting some pricing soon on what that might look like for the United States. But again, while Honor and Huawei don't necessarily share a ton of direct design influence, Honor gets to benefit from the manufacturing acumen of the world's third largest smartphone manufacturer. And I think that's that two factor, the not having preferred pricing and preferred negotiation leverage, and the psychology of we need to have a premium price tag on this product just so that we can cut a profit, is probably what's hammering HTC right now.
I will posit this. HTC has never made a name for itself in smartphones. They were an ODM, and then they came out as their own little thing, and they thought they had the ground level covered. And they did for a little bit, but unfortunately, that wasn't enough. Then they couldn't retain momentum when it came to the One series.
I disagree. I think there was a very brief window where HTC was regarded by consumers as a top tier manufacturer.
Well,
And
the
from
Windows Phone, right?
Oh
Windows
no.
Mobile, excuse me.
Like Windows Mobile was definitely. I mean, I have. I'm doing a challenge with Erica Griffin where we're going back and revisiting old phones, and so this is the one I picked as the HTC Touch Pro. I mean, this is one of the phones that really properly lit me up for modern mobile smartphoning. No, so definitely the Windows Mobile era, because HTC was the ODM of choice for every label out there. If you had an AudioVox, it was an HTC. If you had an OMate or an iMate, it was an HTC. But I think into the Android ecosystem, Android would not have gotten the launch that it did had it not been for what was it, the very first Google phone on T-Mobile, the
G1, and also the Nexus one,
and the Nexus. But also don't forget that the Evo was a major player for Sprint
for 4G.
Even the first Evo totally stole the conversation away from the early days of Samsung until Samsung got smart with their line of phones, the first Galaxy S, which had differing models on every carrier. The Evo was a big deal phone. And there was like, I remember there being a segment on, what was it? It was on G4 before it was called Attack of the Show. This was the killer Android phone to go head to head with the iPhone, was this humongous Evo device with this enormous 4-inch screen. And they had so much of that conversation locked up that the only other competitor was Motorola with the Droid on Verizon. And that was the big fight, was Moto versus HTC, until I think, until we got into the Galaxy S2 era. And once we
Or
got
even
into
the
the
Galaxy
Galaxy S2
S1,
era,
because they were targeting Apple from the start with the iPhone and that
yeah, but
prestige
the
going
only the
on
only
there.
reason why I say that was the transition point, I think the Galaxy S2 actually walked away with the conversation, but the Galaxy S1 was split between the Epic, which had a keyboard on Sprint, was it the Captivate that had the metal back on AT&T, you had plastic back unlocked devices internationally. It was just too broad. I think with the Galaxy S2, Samsung realized they couldn't let carriers dictate what every individual flavor of their phone was going to be. At the same time, HTC had not figured out that conversation, and HTC phones were different than Sprint HTC phones. And I think that was
That
the
started to
beginning.
lead the downfall from 2011 onwards, and they tried to reorganize themselves. They tried to recover with the One series, but even
Right.
still, that was still a very messy affair, and it took until after they lost a lot of credibility with the carriers, especially after that one M9. That
Well, yeah, the one M7 and one M8, I think were still reasonably good performers. It just came at the same time as a lack of advertising, less manufacturing clout, and I think the one that really hurt them, I think the one that really severed their relationship with AT&T was the one A9. That was too expensive a mid-ranger phone for being such an iPhone copycat that I think it really soured the relationship between HTC and AT&T. Then HTC gets burned literally by Qualcomm's terrible chipsets with the one M9, and the recovery with the HTC 10. They didn't have carrier partnerships in place for the HTC 10 like they should have. They didn't have preferred, showcasing and floor space dedicated to that phone, and there was no way to recover from that, even though they had one of the best phones of that year.
But all of these ingredients come down to a point where HTC's brand attraction is at a low, at an all-time low, except for smartphones, sure. Or excuse me, for VR, they're rising up, but for smartphones, they're pretty low. And I don't think, even if it hurts their bottom line, to go for a lower price point, I think that at this point, in order to spur something, in order to stimulate something at the very least, that has to happen.
So here's my hypothesis. This is also what Miriam Joire, Tank Girl, and I talked about on her podcast before MWC. I do not believe there is any hope left for HTC as a smartphone manufacturer. I hope I am wrong, but I do not see an outcome that makes sense in the current business market with
And the
how
current strategy.
well, and with the current dichotomy of smartphone players in the market, I don't see an outcome for HTC which revives the HTC brand. I truly believe that selling off a major part of their smartphone division over to Google was a piecemeal attempt to give HTC time to figure out what to do with the Vive, how the Vive can be spun off into a separate company. The HTC label has about 2 years of phones left in it from the designers that went over to Google. So I totally expect we'll see a U12, maybe even a U13, or whatever those phones might be called. And then that'll give the HTC corporation enough time to kind of divide up its assets, and the HTC brand can crater in the safest way possible. Google didn't get stuck with all of their baggage like they did with the Motorola acquisition, or the way that Microsoft did when they acquired Nokia. They only got the designers and talent that they wanted to make new phones. The Vive will easily live on as a brand under any other company. I mean, you could go to Steam and the Vive is going to be fine. And so the HTC label gets chopped up with what's left at HTC, and maybe that label just gets slapped on a bunch of Desire level products, or it gets licensed out like the way that HMD is licensing the Nokia name for their products. And it's just slapped on a bunch of mid-rangers, or, like phones at MVNO carriers. So if you want a Virgin phone with an HTC label on it, maybe it's even made by TCL, and it doesn't have anything to do with the HTC of old, but they paid to have the HTC brand trademark, and that's what we're going to see in the future. I do not see an outcome for HTC to stay as a top tier player against the competition, and especially against themselves from Google as competition. The HTC DNA is over at Google. If you want an HTC, you go get a Pixel.
So, what fun things are you doing this weekend?
I'm gonna be testing out some microphones and playing with some gaming gear, and that's the weekend. It's gonna be fun and chill and relaxing.
I'm going to be exploring Norwich with a date, and afterwards, I'm going to be going perhaps up to Leeds, perhaps all the way through to Liverpool. I'm not sure at this point. That part of that Sunday is going to be a little bit tricky, but I'm going to have some fun, even with
Good.
some rain coming in. I'm going to make sure that this flight diversion, which was caused by a storm that was ravaging Boston and is still doing so with power outages, flooding, and whatnot, and has forced the rebooking of my flight home to next Thursday. I'm going to make sure that I'm going to spend the money I can spend to have a decent time.
I think you've earned it, Jules. I think you're due. We did actually get a tweet from Goran Petrovic. Thanks for the comment. I really appreciate it. I love HTC, but with metal and 3.5 millimeter jack removal, they lost me. Does HTC have more choice than to be Samsung or OnePlus? A9 was HTC killer in Europe. It sold so bad that no one wanted HTC phones in their offerings in the future. And the thing that sucks is I really liked when HTC's differentiator was boom sound. I really liked when they had something special to offer phones that no other company was playing with. Even back to their really funky, I think it was called the HTC Surround. Was that Windows Phone 7 phone with the slider speaker grill? Like
I vaguely remember that.
HTC was responsible for so many amazing experiments, radical design language, pushing the boundaries on what we could put in our pocket. And I think all of that is gone. I think all of that spirit is gone. And I really feel like if you want the next flavor or the HTC DNA for your next phone, you got to look at a Pixel. The Pixel 3, I think, will be the first true representation of what HTC designer acumen and Google software focus can truly deliver. And I hope it's not a split launch. Like, I really hope they don't do another HTC builds one and LG builds the other. I hope this is a unified, focused vision from Google using that HTC talent.
I really want to end this on a brighter note, since let's maybe
No, I was
this
just bringing it up because Goran sent us
no,
that
no,
email,
Gordon
and I
spent,
was actually
no,
watching
no,
the
no. I
show.
understand, tweet, we're very obliged for the privilege of handling email. It's very, very nice. But I'm trying to look at something that's interesting. Nokia, Ronald Laporte sharing a letter from Nokia. This was apparently after a press event of some sort, and they were like people, press were already segueing
Oh
to
my God, that's
HTC.
hilarious.
Hi, thanks for attending Nokia World 2010. We hope you enjoyed it and got all the information you needed. As you're off to the HTC press conference, we wanted to give you a little HTC press conference
That's
survival
so
kit.
funny.
The HTC ham, tomato, and cheese, not the most exciting, sandwich, an energy bar in case you needed a boost, a giant foam finger to use during the Q&A, just make sure your question gets answered, a pen and pad for doodling, earplugs, and an eye mask in case you feel snoozy, and a few extra items to keep you entertained. Enjoy, the Nokia team.
God, so like, smartphones, the smartphone wars used to
Well,
be a lot more fun.
also, yeah, remember when the media, the press, PR kind of had its verve going on, and people
Yeah,
actually
it was good
there's
times, man.
competition.
Just a little tear. It makes me feel super old. So on that note, we should probably wrap things up.
Yes,
Again,
we should.
I definitely want to thank everyone who joined the conversation, people tweeting using that PN Weekly hashtag, and folks sending in emails. And I keep making this promise, and I do mean it, even if it doesn't always come to pass, that we will get back on track to a proper listener take the wheel and mailbag episodes at the end of each month. Well, there you have it, folks. Another episode of the Pocketnow Weekly has come and gone. This show is over, but the conversation continues on Twitter, where Jules is at Point Jules. Maybe harass him a little as he traipses through the UK. You could probably use a little tech commentary and geekery to join the conversation. And I, of course, am humbly at Some Gadget Guy. Pocketnow is around the web on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Google+, YouTube, and our home site, pocketnow.com, es.pocketnow.com for Spanish speakers. We're basically everywhere. Shows like this cannot exist without your support. Sharing the weekly with your friends who love mobile technology and dropping reviews on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever podcast reviews can be left. Once again, we want to thank this week's sponsor. Check out the Google Cloud Platform podcast. Definitely give their show a listen. But ultimately, there would not be a show here on Pocketnow if it weren't for our listeners and subscribers who have kept us on the air since 2012. The Pocketnow Weekly will be back next week with all kinds of delicious technology goodness. So make sure you tune back in. With one last word from our sponsor. Looking to move to the cloud? Check out the Google Cloud Platform Weekly podcast, where Google developer advocates answer questions, get in the weeds, and talk to experts, customers, and partners about GCP. Click to learn more and subscribe to the podcast at g.co/GCP podcast.